Les doy la bienvenida nuevamente a la Conferencia
Welcome
Internacional
again to
sobre
the
Carbono
International Blue
Humedales
Carbon and Wetlands
2025
Conference
y una
2025.
bienvenida especial para
Special
quienes
welcome
están
to those
conectando a
joining
Zoom
us
nuevamente. Algunos
through
anuncios importantes de
Zoom.
momento. Las
These are some
presentaciones que
important
aparecen se
reminders.
están grabando en
All
formatos en vivo y
presentations
también están en formato pregrabado.
are
Pueden enviar sus preguntas a través de la
live and
aplicación Cuba
pre-recorded.
desde
You
su
can submit your
computadora o
questions
desde
or
su
comments
dispositivo
at any
móvil.
time through your
Contamos
Hobub
con
app from your
interpretación
computer or
simultánea
mobile
y si aún no
device.
tienen sus
Simultaneous
audífonos, pueden
interpretation in English and
acercarse
Spanish
al
too.
fondo del
Available at this
auditorio
venue.
para
If you need assistance,
conseguirlos.
please speak to one of our
Si
technicians.
realizan publicaciones en LinkedIn,
If
pueden
you're posting on
encontrarnos como
LinkedIn, tag us as at
@bluecarbonmrv
BlueCarbon
y utilizar
MRV
el hashtag
and use hashtag
IBCWC2025 para que
IBCWC
podamos
2025
ver
so
y
that we
compartir
can
sus
see and share your
publicaciones.
posts.
Pasamos ahora al quinto bloque
Now we move
temático,
on to the fifth technical
políticas y
block,
gobernanza
Blue
del
Carbon
carbono azul.
Policies and Governance.
Ninguna solución
No climate
climática puede
solution
durar sin
lasts without
instituciones.
institutions.
5 temas
5
centrales
central themes
dan forma a
shape
las
the
sesiones
technical
técnicas
sessions
de este
of
encuentro,
these
cada uno
meeting, each
reflejando una
reflecting
prioridad urgente
an
en la
urgent
estrategia
priority in our
climática de
region's
nuestra
climate
región:
strategy:
ecología,
ecology,
innovación,
innovation,
comunidad,
community,
financiamiento y
financing, and
gobernanza.
governance.
Este quinto
This
bloque
fifth technical block
cuenta cómo las
explores
estructuras
how
políticas e
political and
institucionales
institutional
integran el
structures
carbono azul
integrate blue carbon
en estrategias climáticas
into
nacionales y
national
marcos de
climate
largo plazo.
strategies and long-term
Nuestros
frameworks.
ponentes son
Our speakers are
María Cecilia
Maria
Pertuz,
Cecilia
líder de
Pertuz,
políticas de
policy
Fair
lead at
Carbon;
Fair Carbon;
Chantalle
Chantal
Clarke-Samuels, directora
Clarke-Samuels,
ejecutiva de la Autoridad
Executive
e
Director of
Instituto de
the
Manejo de
Belize
Zonas Costeras de Belice;
Coastal Zone Management
y
Authority,
Jerome Fitzgerald,
and
quien es
Jerome
asesor
Fitzgerald,
principal en
Senior
políticas
Policy
de la
Advisor at the
Oficina del
Office
Primer
of a
Ministro
Prime Minister
de la Mancomunidad
of
de las
the
Bahamas.
Commonwealth of the
Después de estas
Bahamas.
presentaciones
Following these
individuales,
individual
tendremos un
presentations, we
panel
will
de
have a
discusión
panel discussion
moderado
moderated
por
by
Adriana
Adriana
Matamoros, oficial
Matamoros,
regional del
Regional
Fondo
Officer for the
Planeta
Blue
Azul
Planet
para
Fund
América
for
Latina y el
Latin
Caribe
America and
en
the
la Embajada
Caribbean at the
Británica
British
en Quito,
Embassy in
Ecuador.
Quito, Ecuador.
María Cecilia, quien es nuestra próxima
Maria
ponente,
Cecilia,
es
our next
experta
speaker,
en
is
política
an
ambiental y líder de
environmental policy
políticas en
expert
Fair
and policy
Carbon,
lead
donde
at Fair
trabaja
Carbon,
en
where she
la
works
intersección
at the
entre la
intersection of
ciencia, la
science,
política y
policy,
desarrollo
and
comunitario para
community
promover
development to
mercados de
promote
carbono azul
high-integrity
de
blue
alta
carbon
integridad.
markets.
Con formación en
With a
gestión
background
ambiental
in
costera
coastal
por la
environmental
Universidad
management
de
from
Duque,
Duke
ha trabajado
University,
en
she has worked at WWF,
la Universidad de
Duke
Duque y el
University,
Departamento
and the
Nacional de
National Planning
Planeación de
Department of
Colombia.
Colombia.
Su experiencia
Her
incluye
experience
áreas
includes marine
protegidas,
protected areas,
soluciones basadas en naturaleza y
nature-based
adaptación
solutions, and
climática con
climate
equidad,
adaptation
así
with
como
equity,
mentorías
as well
a
as
jóvenes
mentoring
profesionales y
young
voluntariado de
professionals and
restauración de
volunteering in
arrecifes.
reef
Su
restoration.
presentación se titula
Her presentation is
Condiciones
titled
habilitantes para el
Enabling
carbono azul,
Conditions for Blue
una hoja de
Carbon, a
ruta de
roadmap
preparación
for
para América
Latin
Latina y el
America and the
Caribe.
Caribbean.
Vamos a darle la bienvenida
Please
con un
join
aplauso,
me
por
in
favor.
welcoming Mrs. Pertuz.
Solo presionen una vez, adelante, en el slide y atrás. Listo. Gracias.
Buenas tardes. Bueno, es todo un reto hacer esta presentación hasta ahora
Good
porque todos
afternoon.
tenemos
This is
sueño
going to
por
be a
el
challenge. You know,
almuerzo,
everybody's feeling
así que
sleepy right
trataré de
now because
hacerlo
of
lo más animado
lunch, so
posible.
I try to be as upbeat as possible.
Mi nombre es María Cecilia
I'm Maria
Pertuz.
Cecilia Pertuz,
Como mencionaron, soy la líder de
as
políticas de Fair
I've
Carbon
been presented,
y hoy
lead
les vengo a hablar un poco sobre las
public
condiciones
policies of Fair Carbon, and I'll
habilitantes
talk
para el
about the
desarrollo de
enabling
proyectos de
conditions
carbono
for
azul,
developing blue carbon
específicamente en el
projects,
mercado voluntario
specifically
de
in the
carbono.
voluntary
Y los
carbon
resultados que
markets, and
vamos
the
a ver
results
van a
that
ser
you're going to
enfocados
see
en
are
la
going to
región
be
de América
focused on the
Latina
region of
y
Latin
del
America
Caribe.
and the Caribbean.
Bueno, antes de empezar, les quiero
Before getting
contar
started, I want to tell you quickly
qué
that,
hacemos en Fair Carbon.
what we do at Fair
Básicamente o
Carbon,
principalmente el objetivo
what we
principal es
do is mainly
liberar el
unlock the
potencial de los
power of
ecosistemas
coastal
costeros para poder
ecosystems
impulsar
to
la acción
deliver climate
climática, los
action,
beneficios de biodiversidad y
biodiversity
todos los
benefits,
beneficios
and all
también
the
de resiliencia en las
benefits of
comunidades mediante la
resilience in
expansión de
communities
estos
by
mercados
scaling
de carbono.
these
Y esto lo
carbon
hacemos
markets. And we do this
desarrollando el potencial de los ecosistemas a través de
by
tres aspectos.
unlocking the
Una
potential of
es la parte
ecosystems through
técnica,
three aspects. First is technical expertise,
catalizar los fondos, lo cual Diana nos habló en la presentación de
catalyzing
la mañana,
funds, as
y tener todo
Diane
un
presented this morning, and
de las
get
condiciones de
these
las
full
políticas y las
understanding of the
condiciones
conditions of our
habilitantes
policies
para
and
el
the
desarrollo de los
enabling
proyectos de carbono
conditions to
azul que
develop
sean
blue
de una
carbon
manera
projects so that
o
they
que se creen con
occur,
condiciones justas,
or
creíbles y
that they're
sostenibles
fair,
en el
credible,
tiempo.
sustainable
Voy a
conditions in
ir muy
time. I'm going to
rápidamente
go
las tres
very
barreras que
quickly in
nosotros en
these three
FERCARBON
barriers
tratamos
that
de
we try to
acabar.
knock
Una es
down
la
at
parte
FairCarbon.
técnica,
One thing is the technical
también Diana lo mencionó al
issue,
principio,
as
y es
Diana
que
said at the
hay
beginning.
una alta
There is
hay altos problemas de
the
entender todo el lenguaje
problems with
técnico.
understanding all the
La información
technical
está
jargon.
fragmentada, hay pocos expertos en
Information is
carbono azul
fragmented.
y los
There are
pocos
very
que
few
existen
experts in blue carbon, and
tienen las
the
agendas
few ones
saturadas,
that
y eso
are out
obviamente
there
afecta
are pretty
el
busy,
desarrollo de los
and that of
proyectos.
course
Para
impact
solucionar esto en
the
FERCARBON
project. And to solve this at
desarrollamos algo
PerCarbon,
que
we
llamamos el
developed
Blue Carbon
something we
Academy,
call
que
the
es
Blue
básicamente
Carbon
una
Academy,
academia
which is
sobre carbono azul
a blue
que
carbon
lleva, es una
school.
herramienta
I mean,
gratis, es
this
una
is a
plataforma
free
que cualquier
tool. This
persona
is a
puede entrar
platform anyone can
para
have
buscar
access to,
democratizar
so
el
we can
acceso a la
democratize the
información
access to
en relación
information
al
in
desarrollo
relation
de proyectos de
to
carbono azul.
developing
Y
blue
esta
carbon projects.
plataforma
This
es
platform
una herramienta práctica.
is a
Hemos
practical
tratado
tool.
de que sea libre de mucha jerga
It's
técnica
free of
y
technical
que lleva a las personas, a los desarrolladores,
jargon,
a los
and this
hacedores de
helps
política,
developers
inversores y
and
demás,
policymakers
que
and
ingresan a
investors
que a través de
um,
5 módulos
to
puedan
go through 5
entender paso a
modules so that
paso
they can
cómo
understand step by
desarrollar
step
este
how
tipo de
to
proyectos. Y
develop these
también
sort of
tenemos
projects. And we
unos
also have
paquetes o servicios que
packages and
complementan
services that complement
la academia, y es
the
que ofrecemos también la oportunidad de
training, and we
tener
also
expertos
provide the opportunity
que
to have
acompañen el proceso.
experts accompanying and
La
supporting
segunda
each process.
barrera
The
está
second
relacionada
barrier
con
is
toda la
related
parte
with
financiera.
finance.
Diana se enfocó en eso,
Diana
entonces voy
focused
a
on that,
obviar la
so
explicación
I'm
detallada,
going
pero
to
básicamente
skip
lo que queremos
details here,
solucionar
but
acá
here we
es
want to
disminuir
reduce
la falta de acceso
the
de
lack of
financiación
access
en los estados
and
iniciales de los
funding
proyectos,
at
y
the
para
initial
eso
steps
lanzamos
and
el
phases of
fondo
a project. This is
catalizador.
why we have the
Y la tercera barrera, que es la que nos vamos a enfocar en esta sesión, está
catalyst, the
relacionada
fund,
con toda la
and the
complejidad
other
regulatoria
parties,
que
all the
existe para
regulatory
desarrollar proyectos de
complexity out
carbono
there
azul.
to develop blue
Todos
carbon projects,
los frameworks, o como
all
toda
the
la parte
frameworks,
regulatoria
all
de los países,
regulations in all
va
countries
evolucionando muy
evolve
rápidamente
very
y va
quickly,
cambiando mucho por
and changes
regiones,
in
incluso a
every
veces cuando
region,
son países
even
no centrales, sino que son
in those
federados, cambia
countries
dentro de
that
las
are
mismas
part of a
del mismo
federation.
país.
They also, I mean, have these
Y
changes
como
inside
han
the same
mencionado varios de
country.
los
And
panelistas,
as
hay poca
panelists have already
claridad a
said, there
veces
is
sobre la tenencia de tierras en este tipo de
no clarity
ecosistemas
about
y también en los
land
derechos de los
tenure in
carbonos.
these sort of
Entonces, entender tener el
sites, and
entendimiento
also
de
the rights
cómo
over
son
the
todas
carbon.
estas
So we must
condiciones en los
understand all
países
these
no es tan
conditions
fácil.
in every
Y para
country,
eso
and that's not an
desarrollamos
easy
lo
task.
que
This is why
nosotros
we
llamamos
developed
los
something we
Enabling
call
Conditions
the
Country
Enabling
Profile, que
Conditions
son
Country
básicamente
Profile.
reportes
This
por
is
países donde
reports by
analizamos
country
todas
where
estas
we
condiciones
analyze all these
habilitantes,
enabling
y también
conditions, and
desarrollamos
also
un dashboard que lo llamamos el Blue
have a
Carbon Policy
dashboard,
Dashboard,
which is
donde se
the
encuentran
Blue Carbon
diferentes
Policy Dashboard.
mapas
That's what we call
para
it, where
brindar información
we can
gratuita y
find
accesible
maps to
para los hacedores de política
provide
principalmente.
free
También
tools and
desarrollamos
information
una
for
serie de
policymakers.
webinars
Mainly, we also
donde
conduct
tratamos
webinars
de
where we
enfrentar temas o
tackle
misconceptions, como lo llamamos en
misconceptions
los webinars, y es básicamente
and obstacles. And
desmitificar
this is
cosas que no son
about
ciertas o no tan ciertas alrededor
demystifying
de temas
things
de
that are
carbono
not totally
azul.
true or not true at all
Entonces, ya
around blue
para
carbon
entrar un poco
matters.
más en
Now, to get
detalle,
into
este contexto,
details,
ustedes
these
ya lo saben,
something you
los
already
ecosistemas
know.
costeros son
Coastal
campeones, como los
ecosystems
llamamos
are
nosotros,
the
del clima, de la
champions, as we
naturaleza y de
call
las
them, of
personas.
climate and nature
Tienen
and
mayores
people.
capacidades de
They
secuestro de carbono por
have
hectárea en
a
comparación a
better
los bosques
capacity of carbon
terrestres.
sequestration in comparison
Los
with forests
ahorros anuales
on land,
en la reducción de
and
daños
it provides
de eventos extremos de la
savings in
naturaleza son
reducing
alrededor de
damage
65 billones de
against
dólares y el
nature
75% de
forest. That's
especies
around
costeras
$65 billion,
dependen
and
de los ecosistemas, como lo
fishing
mencionó
industry
Steve,
is
ustedes
dependent on
saben,
these
muchos de los
ecosystems, as
crecen en
Steve has
wetlands y
showed,
y
those
los peces que
fish
no,
that
tienen
grow
un
in
alto
wetlands and those
impacto
that don't,
en
and
esto
that
y
has a huge
son
impact.
spots de
And
biodiversidad.
of course, these
25 países
are biodiversity
en el
spots. 25
mundo
countries in the world
concentran más del
concentrate more
90% de
than
los manglares
90% of
que tienen
mangrove
potencial de
with
restauración.
a potential for
Y hay
restoration.
4
And there are
países que
4
tienen
countries that
la mayor
have the best
capacidad o potencial
capacity or
de
potential
secuestro de
to
carbono en los
sequester
manglares.
carbon
2 de
in
esos países
mangrove.
están en
2 of
nuestra
those
región,
countries
que
are in
son
our
México
region. We
y
have
Brasil.
Mexico and
Y si
Brazil.
nosotros estamos
And
en un
if we
escenario
are
hipotético
in this
donde
hypothetical
el retorno
scenario where
esperado
the expected return
los créditos de
of
carbono son de
carbon
alrededor de
credits are about
$60 por tonelada,
$60 per
México,
ton.
por ejemplo,
Mexico, for
tendría un
example,
retorno
would have a
esperado de
expected return of
1.191 millones de
um,
dólares y Brasil de 623.
$1.1 billion,
Sin embargo,
and Brazil would be
uno de los
123
principales
million.
obstáculos
But one of
para
the main
acceder a estos
obstacles to have access
beneficios
to
o
these
para
benefits
desbloquear todo este
or to
potencial son
unlock
las
all this
condiciones habilitantes
potential is the
relacionadas
enabling
a la
conditions
política y a la parte
concerning
regulatoria.
policies and
Y debido a
regulations.
eso,
And
nosotros
for this
desarrollamos
reason,
un
we
índice
developed an
que llamamos el
indicator
Blue Carbon Enabling
we
Conditions
called
Index,
the Blue Carbon
que
Enabling Conditions
ayuda a
Index,
navegar todo
which
este sistema
helps
complejo de política que
navigating all
tratamos
this
de entregar
complexity in
información
policies. We deliver
sobre qué tan listos están los
information
países
on
para
how
desarrollar
ready
proyectos de
countries are
carbono
to
azul para el
develop blue
mercado
carbon
voluntario de carbono
projects for
y
the
cómo hacer eso
voluntary
podemos
carbon market.
identificar
And
riesgos,
and there
huecos
we're able
regulatorios
to identify
oportunidades de
gaps
inversión.
or risks
Y la
or
forma como
investment
este índice
opportunities. The
funciona
way
es
the
que
index works is
un
that
cuestionario de
we
12 preguntas divididos
wrote a
en 3
questionnaire with
componentes o
12
3
questions divided
secciones.
in 3 sections.
Ahorita les voy a hablar más en
Uh,
detalle de qué mide
talk
cada uno.
about
Y
that
al
in more
final de
detail
todo
in a
el
moment.
proceso
And
de la
at the
revisión del
end, so about the end
cuestionario,
of all
estos
this
puntajes,
questionnaire, these
dependiendo de los
scores,
pesos que
depending on
le
the
asignamos a
way
cada
we
categoría,
give to each
nos van
category,
a dar un índice.
you're
Y
going to
dependiendo del
then get
resultado,
to the index. And
utilizamos un
depending on the
sistema de
results, then
semáforo
we use this
donde
traffic
los
light
países se pueden
system where
ubicar
countries
en
can then
verde, que
position
son
themselves in green,
favorables,
which
en
is
amarillo,
favorable,
ambiguos,
in
y en
yellow,
rojo,
that's ambiguity,
cuando
and
no son
red is
favorables
when
las
they're not,
condiciones.
conditions are not
La primera
enabling. The
sección
first
de los
section
enabling
of
conditions
the
es
enabling
identificar qué
conditions is to
experiencia tiene el
identify what
país
experience the
en
country has
desarrollar
in
proyectos de
developing
carbono basado en naturaleza, tanto
nature-based
específicamente de
carbon,
manglares como de
specifically
otro
for
tipo
mangrove
de
and for any
iniciativas
other
basadas en
type
la
of
naturaleza que están
nature-based
registradas
initiatives
exclusivamente en el mercado voluntario de
that
carbono.
are registered in
¿Por qué es
the
importante
voluntary
medir
carbon
esto?
market. Why
Porque
is this
si
important?
bien
Because whereas
un país, por ejemplo, no tiene
a
experiencia en
country may not
desarrollo de
have
proyectos de
experience
carbono
in
azul, pero
developing
sí,
blue
por ejemplo,
carbon
en bosques
project experience,
terrestres,
but
esa experiencia
on
ayuda un poco a
land
navegar cuáles son las
in
políticas y
land
las
forest,
condiciones
that
que se deben
experience help navigate the
enfrentar
policies
los
of the
desarrolladores.
conditions that
La
developers must
segunda sección son
face.
todos los requisitos
Second section
nacionales que
has to
existan en el
do with
país.
all the
Esto
national
está
requirements in the
muy
country. This is
relacionado con
um,
generar
linked
créditos de alta calidad.
to generating high
Nosotros
quality credits,
identificamos
or we identify
procesos estandarizados de
standardized
autorización,
processes
que si por
for
ejemplo los proyectos
authorizations
tienen
and
que estar en
permitting.
registro
Maybe if the
nacional
project has
del
to be
país u otro,
registered at a national
si
registry or
exigen,
something,
además de lo que piden
or
los
if in
estándares,
addition to the standards,
mecanismos de distribución
the
equitativa de beneficios,
requested
si
benefit
exigen procesos de
distribution
consentimiento
mechanisms
libre,
of, or
previo e
if there's
informado
some
o SPIC, como me voy a referir más adelante,
prior
u otros
free
procesos de
consent
participación,
or
y si
other
también el país exige
participation
procesos de
mechanisms, and
monitoreo,
also if
reporte y
the
verificación.
country demands
El
monitoring,
tercer
report, and
componente es todo lo que
verification.
tiene que ver con tenencia de
Um,
tierras y derechos de
Next is
carbono.
land
Básicamente
tenure
evaluamos
and carbon
cuáles son
rights.
las
There we are
diferentes
evaluating
legislaciones y
the
regulaciones
different
relacionadas
legislations or
con
regulations
tenencia de
related with
tierras y si
land
existen
tenure,
cosas
and if
específicas sobre los
or land
derechos de
ownership, and
carbono.
if there is
¿Y
any
por qué esto es
specificity
importante?
around carbon
Porque
rights. Why is
si
this
un
important?
proyecto no
Because if
asegura
a
los derechos
project
de
does not
carbono, luego no
secure
pueden ser
the carbon
vendidos.
rights, they cannot be
Pero
sold
ya luego vamos a
down the
entrar más en
line, but
detalle de lo que
we'll talk
necesitamos.
about that in a moment.
Ya entremos a la carne,
Now,
the juicy
let's,
stuff.
cut through the
Entonces,
cheese,
lo que encontramos, en
Um,
este momento hemos analizado 19
we have
países alrededor del
analyzed
mundo.
19 countries around the world so
Em,
far.
Ustedes son unos privilegiados
You
porque es la
are
primera vez que
privileged. This is
hablamos
the
en
first
público
time
sobre
that
los
we
resultados.
speak in
Entonces,
public about these results.
todas las recomendaciones son súper bienvenidas.
So,
Lo que encontramos en
comments are
general, o
welcome.
una
What we have
conclusión general
found, or
que
a
vimos, es que
general
hay
conclusion, is
una
that
amplia
there
variabilidad
is
de la claridad,
variability in the standardization and favorability of enabling conditions. If you observe, Sri Lanka has 1.7, Indonesia has 4.7. These are two countries in the same region. There is variability on how clear those conditions are in the countries in the same region. And if we focus here in the Americas, we see that the country on top on those conditions that are more enabling and favoring, we have Brazil with 4.1, and the one with the lowest score was Jamaica. And in my opinion, this is a huge opportunity to collaborate in the region, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. Here you have these bars telling you, first of all, that in every continent there is high variability around enabling conditions. There's no continent at the moment where you can say that they're just top. Africa is on top, they know how to do it, or Asia, but every continent has this variability, but this is an opportunity to collaborate among the different nations and countries to standardize or to find the best way so that enabling conditions are not that different. Also, very few countries obtained a score above 4. That's Kenya, Ghana, Brazil, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea just got there, and these countries are relatively better prepared to develop blue carbon projects. These countries, I mean, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Why? Because when we create the index, we see that on paper, this is the conditions they present to an applicant and how clear everything is. But if we go to a country that have these clear rules, but there are many entities participating, lots of permitting required, that's going to delay processes, that's going to generate excessive costs, and so on. So this is kind of the caveat for interpreting the index. Now let's talk about these regional results. Right now we've analyzed the 5 countries in Latam and the Caribbean: Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico. And we found that countries in general have more experience in developing countries, nature-based projects in those ecosystems that are not blue carbon, with the exception of those countries with the blue wave. They do have experience with blue carbon projects. In February this year, we conducted an analysis and put together a database listing all the projects in the voluntary blue carbon market, and we found 75 projects in Plan Vivo and Vera. I mean, and out of those 75 projects, 13 of those projects are in Latam and the Caribbean. Nine are in Mexico and 4 are in Colombia. One of them is Vida Manglar, which is in the process of issuing and generating credits, and the others are in the process. Something else we found in the second section of the questionnaire is concerning national requirements. And here we found that very few countries have specific rules for the projects that will participate in the voluntary market, and the country is Brazil. Recently, in December last year, they tested a piece of legislation where they attempt to create a harmony or synergy with all the requirements they have for Article 6 voluntary market and their national market, so that there is a better standardized system. But what if countries are not having that clarity in terms of the requirements? That creates and generates uncertainty that can affect schedules and costs and delays, because maybe a new permit had to be processed and they didn't know that impact investors, so they doubt in investing in the projects, but there is this regulatory uncertainty, and then governments can then come up with the taxes that were not considered before, and then projects are then increasing their costs and having these delays, and their cash flow gets affected. Now, Colombia and Mexico are countries in the region trying to create and develop legislation. There's some drafts. For example, Colombia, there is a resolution from the Ministry of Environment in the making, but there is no clarity about the requirements of the processes. The general indication is that there's going to be a process, but there's no detail about what's going to happen and how this is going to impact current existing projects. And something else we measured in these requirements is the conditions that projects must comply with for all the benefit distribution mechanisms.
La participación de las comunidades de manera libre, previa,
informada. Participation. Brazil, again, with the new legislation they issued, they're including specific clauses forcing these sort of participation and considerations, and they included that there must be a fund so that all the benefits of the projects developed in areas traditionally occupied by indigenous people or traditional communities must receive at least 50% of those benefits, of those proceeds. But however, Colombia, for example, only requires that benefits distribution must be observed, but they don't include percentages. But that's not only here, but also in Africa and Asia, of course. There are different ways countries create the rules and enforce their legislations now. Concerning land ownership, just to give you a bit of a context, all the land ownership systems tell you how the land is being transferred, how they can be used, how they can be managed and improved. And these conditions can be either formally written in rules and regulations, but they can also be established informally through case law systems, which is basically the traditional ways communities have to manage access and ownership of land. Understanding these systems is very important because that's going to affect how projects must secure the permitting or who they have to consult, etc. And what we found in the region is that, of course, land ownership or the rules for land ownership vary enormously among the countries we analyzed. If you realize only Colombia and Dominican Republic have this common ownership of mangrove, that is, the government is the owner of those lands. But many communities here in Colombia, Afro-Colombian communities, have had this ancestral tenure and use of these ecosystems. And of course, that has an impact on the negotiation process and the creation of the projects and benefit distribution. All the countries we have analyzed have some sort of a concession mechanism for mangrove areas. In some countries such as Mexico, Jamaica, and Brazil have specific ways for communities to access to land and develop these sort of projects through joint agreements with the government. In Mexico, they do it through HIDOs, and in Brazil through local associations that must go through a specific process to be constituted. Now, concerning carbon rights, as Amy presented in the previous presentation, are also very relevant, and the implication is that we don't know owns those rights. In some countries, it is clear. In Brazil, again, it is explicitly established in legislation what carbon rights are and who are the owners of those rights and how they can be transferred. In Colombia, it is in the making, but there is enough clarity. And Jamaica, Mexico, Dominican Republic, there is this ambiguity. There's some implicit things that can be assumed, but there's nothing that is clear enough. So this lack of clarity has an impact on how fast projects can move, because you have to understand very well what the processes are, with whom you have to talk, what institutions are going to be involved, and that brings up legal challenges, increases transaction costs, and generates difficulties for funding. What can we do to improve these enabling conditions? The first invitation is that we harmonize and strengthen these enabling conditions. It can be done through regional cooperation. We can learn from each other, from our neighbors, to harmonize policies, but also we have to tackle those local regulatory gaps. We have to understand how every country works and behaves so that we can solve these policies. And to conclude, at Fair Carbon, we will continue to analyze countries. At the moment, we have Bahamas in a process, but others are in the pipeline. If you want to look at the country profiles, you can scan the code on the left. This is all the resources we have. They're all free, so you can have access anytime you want. And during second half of this year, we're going to be launching 2 policy briefs. And by the year end, we're going to have a global analysis of everything that we have found. And you can also go into the Blue Carbon Policy Dashboard, where you can find different maps, interactive for inquiring information. And if you want to know more on the rest of the things we do in finance and technical, you can also scan these QR codes. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Pertuz, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Chantalle Clarke-Samuels. Mrs. Samuels is Executive Director of the Belize Coastal Zone Management Authority and has over 50 years of experience in coastal and marine management. Her work encompasses ecosystem services valuation, marine spatial planning, integrated coastal zone management, and climate change adaptation. She led the development of Belize's first national integrated coastal zone management plan. This is the first plan in Belize, and her presentation is titled Moving Toward Robust Governance Frameworks for Blue Carbon Assets in Belize. Let's welcome her with a warm round of applause.
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone who is here in the room and those online. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I get started, I really want to take the opportunity to thank the organizers for putting together this very important, timely, and informative conference, which for me, I've been learning a lot since I got here. The presentation that I will be delivering today really will focus on a national perspective on blue carbon and what it means for a country to put together key policies and frameworks so that as a country, there is an enabling environment to advance blue carbon trading, blue carbon protection, restoration, etc. I want to mention too that blue carbon conservation, restoration, and management in Belize falls under the mandate of different agencies and their different legal instruments. For instance, we have the Forest Department, whose mandate is for mangroves. The Fisheries Department, as per their legislation, is responsible for seagrass management. And then we have others, the National Climate Change Office, the ministry responsible for investment and economic transformation has a stake, the Blue Bond and Finance Permanence Unit, and of course, the Coastal Zone Management Authority and Institute that I represent. So strictly speaking, through an ecological lens, for us in Belize, blue carbon refers to those carbon compounds that are captured and sequestered by coastal and marine ecosystems that we've been hearing about since yesterday: mangroves, seagrass meadows, and salt marshes. It would be remiss of me to mention that people are important, and we learned that from Dr. Bino's talk, as well as Mark, who used the term socio-ecological systems when referring to blue carbon. And so I will personally make that adjustment in future presentations. Thank you, Mark and Dr. Bino. In terms of the ecosystem services and benefits that are derived from mangrove ecosystems in Belize, I believe those that have spoken before me have mentioned these benefits, and so I just want to reiterate what they mean for us in Belize. We recognize the shoreline protection. They are seen as natural infrastructure to provide that protective function. There are critical habitats that support biodiversity. They have properties in terms of filtering water, climate regulation. They support livelihoods linked to tourism and fisheries in Belize. And the last estimate is that the mangrove-associated ecosystem services through tourism and fisheries provide at least US $200 million per year. In terms of seagrass meadows, similarly, there are benefits that you all will recognize and appreciate that we benefit from in Belize, linked to improving good water quality, coastal protection through wave abatement, and climate regulation as well. So this map illustrates Belize's efforts to map its mangrove and seagrass coverage. This map was produced in 2021, and essentially the latest estimate is that there's 74,000 plus hectares of mangrove coverage. We have 3 key true species of mangroves. Buttonwood mangrove exists in Belize, but because it's a mangrove-associated species, it's not recognized as one of the true mangrove species in Belize. And seagrass meadows consist of 286,000 plus hectares. I thought it was also important to mention that in terms of tracking the status of Belize's blue carbon assets, in 2020, Belize commissioned a study to look at the coverage but also net loss of mangroves over time. And so this table shows the change in mangrove cover from 2014 to 2019. And overall, the country, based on the methodology used, experienced a net loss of 0.13% of its mangroves. There is work currently underway to conduct a spatial assessment of total mangrove cover for Belize and change for the period 2020 to 2024, and we're expecting those results in September of this year. In terms of our seagrass meadows, we do need to improve our understanding and the status of seagrass in Belize. And so a similar type of assessment will soon be conducted where we will ascertain the status and characterize the species that exist in Belize. Okay, so transitioning now to legal frameworks for the protection of blue carbon in Belize. In 2018, the Belize Forest Protection of Mangrove Regulations were updated. And there were some key drivers and key provisions placed in the updated mangrove regulations, specifically to prohibit the alteration of mangroves without a permit, to establish a process for permitting and the conditions when permits are issued for mangrove alteration. The regulations include offenses and stiff penalties for non-compliance. And finally, the regulations provides for a review board to look at applications and make decisions regarding those applications. And I just wanted to share this dashboard here, which was introduced after the passage of the regulations. Essentially, it does two things. It allows the government of Belize to demonstrate transparency over the approval and issuance of mangrove licenses. So I don't expect you to be able to read this, but it does state who the licensee is, the specific area where mangroves have been given, where approval has been given for mangroves to be altered, and the expiration date of that mangrove permit. So it also allows for community members to participate in compliance monitoring. So if within my community, I see that there are mangroves being altered, I can go to this website and to check the area where it's being altered. If there is an approved license or permit for the activity, and if none, then it allows me as a member of the community to call the forest department and to request their assistance to come and check the matter. In November of 2021, Belize signed a Blue Bond Agreement. And there are some conditions in the Blue Bond Agreement that specifically support the designation of remaining public lands within the Belize Barrier Reef Reserve System as mangrove reserves. And consequently, in 2022, there were 2 of our marine reserve areas that were declared as, or the national lands within those marine reserves were declared as mangrove reserves. These are specifically the Saltwater Key Forest Reserve and or Bacalar Chico Forest Reserve, one in the north and one in the south of Belize. I also want to mention that in 2023, there was a climate change and carbon market initiatives bill that was introduced, and it has undergone extensive consultation, and it is still under review. However, there are 3 key ambitions of that bill. 1, to enhance climate change resilience and low emission development. Secondly, to allow us as a country to meet global commitments as per the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, and finally for Belize to establish a market to trade carbon. I also want to take the opportunity to mention that last week, the government of Belize, through the Ministry of Blue Economy and Marine Conservation, announced the approval and launch of Belize's first blue carbon pilot project, the goal of which is to develop and issue Belize's first carbon credits. The pilot will be taking place in the Turnef Atoll Marine Reserve, which will serve as a demonstration site. And this project will be delivered in partnership with Brightwater Climate. The other piece of legislation, and I'm sorry the title got cut off there, is a draft blue economy bill. Essentially, this blue economy bill recognizes the importance of blue carbon assets, and so there are provisions built in the bill to support these ecosystems because there is a recognition that they impact livelihoods and those who benefit from the services. As was mentioned yesterday too, Belize has completed its third National Determined Contributions. It was officially launched at the end of July. It has targets for the terrestrial area, but for the purpose of today, and specifically blue carbon, it has targets such as restoring 2,500 hectares of mangroves in public lands, conserving and protecting 8,000 hectares of mangrove. And there are some new ambitious activities that have been added, such as creating a dedicated mangrove unit within the Forest Department, primarily to assist with implementing and enforcing the mangrove regulations that I spoke about earlier. We do have a draft National Mangrove Restoration Action Plan, and so that has been tabled as one of the activities to be adopted and implemented. There is some work in terms of peatlands, and so one of the actions under our NDC is to finalize our national peatland map and the initial associated carbon assessment. And finally, and certainly not the least, to develop and adopt a national seagrass policy and management plan. For us at the Coastal Zone Management Authority and Institute, we are responsible for taking an integrated approach to the management of those resources within the coastal space. And so doing things like identifying potential risks to habitats, mangroves and seagrass beds, and looking at the trade-offs in terms of certain activities that can or cannot occur within the coastal space is critically important. We've heard a lot yesterday regarding, and somewhat this morning regarding, the importance of linking science and research to policy. And so in the case of our NDC in Belize, we were able to link science as communicated in these journal articles to inform those ambitious targets that were set in our NDC. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to take the opportunity to underscore that in Belize, blue carbon protection, conservation and restoration, and the management is not only linked to the work of the government. We have very vibrant and active locally based NGOs and internationally based organizations that we have enjoyed the partnership with over the years. And so this is just one example, an initiative led by the World Wildlife Fund in Belize, a mangrove conservation champion. So it's essentially an initiative where there is this national competition to encourage private landowners to promote and recognize their innovations in integrating and preserving mangrove in their development. So this is an example of two of the 2024 winners, the Turnif Atoll Marine Reserve, who protected and integrated 11,000 hectares of mangroves in their space. And then there's this Resort El Ban Cabana Mangrove Reserve, which integrated 200 acres of mangroves in their tourism development. And then finally, we do also enjoy a special relationship with the private sector. On the left, you can see members of a local business who, as a part of their responsible corporate citizenship goals, had partnered with our organization to conduct mangrove restoration. And on the right is a member of one of my colleagues who regularly assists with participating in training, learning about new mangrove restoration techniques, and actually going on the ground, on site, to assist with mangrove replanting. So to summarize, I just wanted to mention that, we have these legal instruments, we have very key policy documents, we have strategic partnerships in place that really are helping us to create the enabling environment so that we can continue to protect, conserve, and manage our blue carbon assets. We're not quite there yet. There are lots of lessons to learn, and we're eager to learn those lessons. But I think this is a very strong start for Belize, and we will continue to evolve and grow with time. So thank you so very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to address them during the panel.
Agradecemos a la señora Clarke-Samuels y pasaremos ahora
Now
con una
we move
presentación pregrabada del
to a pre-recorded presentation by Jerome Fitzgerald.
quien es abogado,
Mr.
admitido a los
Fitzgerald is a
barros de
lawyer
Inglaterra
admitted to
y
the
las
bars of
Bahamas
England and the
desde
Bahamas since
1991.
1991.
Posee una
He holds a
maestría
Master
en
of
Derecho
Laws
por el King's
degree from
College
King's
de la
College,
Universidad de
University of
Londres, una
London,
maestría
and a
en
Master's
Comercio,
of
Transporte y
in Commerce,
Finanzas
Transport,
por
and
la
Finance from
City
City
Business
University
School,
Business School.
también en Londres.
Also in London,
Actualmente
he
es
is
asesor
currently a
principal de
senior
políticas del
policy
primer
advisor to the
ministro de
Prime
las
Minister of the
Bahamas. Fue
Bahamas.
ministro de
He
Educación,
served as Minister of
Ciencia y
Education, Science and
Tecnología entre
Technology
el
between
2012 y
2012 and
2017 y ha
2017
ocupado
and has
varios cargos
held
públicos de
various public
liderazgo,
leadership
incluyendo
positions,
senador y
including
presidente del
senator
Consejo de
and
la
chairman of
Universidad
the
de las
board of the
Bahamas.
University of the
Su
Bahamas. His
presentación se titula
presentation is titled
Iniciativa de
The
Carbono
Bahamas
de las
Blue
Bahamas.
Carbon Initiative.
Entonces les pido que por
So
favor,
now let's hear it.
presten atención a la pantalla.
Uh,
Ahora vamos a reproducir la
Now we are
presentación.
going to play this presentation.
Friends, let me begin by saying how much I wish I could be there with you in Santa Marta. I wish I could walk the coast, meet you face to face, and feel the energy of a region like mine that knows what it means to live by the sea and rely on it for everything. The only reason I'm missing such a momentous conference is because I have a traveling conflict. There's nothing I would have loved more than to join you in person and discuss these significant issues. But even from a distance, I feel connected to this moment because what you're discussing today is personal to me. It isn't theory or some abstract thought. This moment is my life. It's about my homeland and future generations. I speak to you from the Bahamas, not just a collection of islands, but a country born in the ocean, shaped by its rhythm, and now challenged by its rising tides. And like so many others in the Caribbean and Latin America, we have learned that survival is not something you inherit, it's something you fight for. So let me tell you a story. Just a few years ago in 2019, Hurricane Dorian hit the northern Bahamas. I know many of you remember the images: homes flattened, whole communities erased, families torn apart. We lost lives, we lost land, but we did not lose our will. That storm didn't just knock on our door. It forced us to ask ourselves if we were going to spend the next 20 years reacting, rebuilding, waiting for help, or were we going to act on our own terms, in our own voice, with our own hands? We chose to act. And so this journey we're on now started with a very unlikely discovery. In 2020, scientists studying the tiger shark in Bahamian waters attached cameras to them, not because they were searching for climate answers, but because they were curious about the migration and feeding habits of the shark. What they caught on camera has reshaped our national story. Beneath our turquoise waters, they discovered more than 93,000 square kilometers of seagrass meadows, the largest in the world. A vast underwater forest quietly storing over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That was our turning point. We had always seen the sea as part of our identity, but for the first time, we saw it as our shield, our asset, our way forward. But until now, it was invisible. None of it was counted or included in our national inventory. We could not leverage it in the global climate finance system or the carbon markets. In 2022, our Parliament passed the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiative Act, a law that recognized carbon as a national asset. It created a legal framework for trading carbon credits. It aligned our system with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This piece of legislation said to Bahamians and to the world that blue carbon absorbing seagrass belongs to us, and we will manage it responsibly, transparently, and monetize it to protect our environment. The Act also provided the government with the power to appoint a project management company, and we appointed Carbon Management Limited. It collects the science, it verifies the data, it structures the credits, it insures them with Lloyd's of London, and it makes sure that the revenue flows into places that need it most. Let me explain how this works. Every 1,000 tons of seagrass carbon is packaged into what we call an enhanced ambition right. Each one is traceable, insured, and transferred into a special purpose vehicle, fully ring-fenced. From there, we issue sovereign blue carbon securities offered to institutional investors with every dollar tied to future verified mitigation. And when that mitigation is confirmed, the funds flow into our National Development Fund, our equivalent of a sovereign wealth fund. A fund with a mandate tied to mitigation efforts and building resilience. That means solar grids, coral restoration, education, vocational training, and reef-positive tourism. This is how we turn carbon into classrooms, seagrass into jobs, natural capital into national wealth. To be clear, this is not charity. This is not aid. This is the right to count what we protect, the right to trade what we store, the right to build a future on the strength of what lies beneath our waters. Too many times, our countries have been treated like collateral damage, places that suffer the consequences of decisions made elsewhere. We may have our challenges, but we are also examples of what's possible. I believe that we're building in the Bahamas, that what we're building in the Bahamas can be adapted across the region. Many of you are already doing the hard work through the Regional Blue Carbon MRV project. Countries like Colombia, Panama, Jamaica, and Suriname are advancing powerful science. That is a huge step. But let's not stop at measurement. Let's make sure what we measure is monetized. Let us make sure our ecosystems are not just admired, but valued and, as I said, monetized. That means passing laws That means building registries. That means training our youth to be data analysts, marine scientists, blockchain engineers, and coastal economists. This work is not only about the environment. It's about our dignity. It's about our independence and refusing to sit quietly in the path of a crisis we did not create. By COP 2030, we will table a proposal to formally include blue carbon in all national greenhouse gas inventories. We will also launch the world's first sovereign blue carbon security. I invite all governments, multilateral partners, and investors to join us. Join us in creating a co-finance platforms for regional MRVs. Join us in piloting Article 6 trades. Join us in building a climate finance system that works for the Global South. We are not waiting for anyone to save us. We are building solutions necessary for our survival. Allow me to conclude with this. The ocean gives us more than beauty. It gives us protection. It gives us food, and it gives us power if we choose to recognize it. The seagrass beneath our waters is more than a meadow. It's a map to a different kind of future, one where nature is respected and counted, where nations like ours are architects, not afterthoughts. Let's move forward together. Thank you.
Agradecemos a todos nuestros ponentes por esas valiosas intervenciones.
Thank you to our speakers for those presentations. Now we invite you to come to the stage so that our moderator, Adriana Matamoros, the Regional Officer, Blue Planet Fund for Latin America and the Caribbean, moderates this panel called Blue Carbon Policy and Governance.
Este también va a ser un espacio para preguntas.
This is also going to be a space for questions. So if anyone has a question, that will be the time to maybe raise your hand and also interact with the speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Well, as it was mentioned, my name is Adriana Matamoros. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Latin America for UK's DEFRA Blue Planet Fund, and we're very honored to be here today moderating such a interesting and important panel on policy and governance for blue carbon. So before we move forward, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our presenters today for such insightful contributions. I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that these perspectives that have been presented today have enriched our understanding and set the stage for really meaningful discussions. So now, without further ado, I would like to briefly pass on to some of the panel questions. I would like to start with you, Maria Cecilia, if that's okay. So you have outlined a roadmap for readiness in the Latin American region. where do you think are countries struggling the most, and what support is needed to overcome those difficulties?
Thank you. Definitely one of the struggles is related to how countries can harmonize all the carbon markets that are evolving. So we have the national carbon markets, for example, but we also have Article 6, and we have the voluntary carbon market. So definitely a country that needs to legislate having all those three aspects in mind. For example, Colombia is trying to develop a national carbon market. Right now we have a carbon tax, but it's trying to evolve into something more. So definitely having that understanding of those three big systems that have different requirements, that is tricky. And if we think about something in particular about blue carbon, definitely understanding the importance and including those ecosystems into the national climate pledges for adaptation and mitigation is also key. So recognizing that importance and going towards that, as Belize have been doing all these years. I think they are the rock stars with Costa Rica in the region. So including all that into the policy road is also crucial. Yeah.
Thank you. And for you, Chantalle Samuels, as Maria Cecilia mentioned, Belize has been a leader on coastal marine policies. What governance innovations or frameworks are proving most useful in establishing blue carbon as a national asset?
Yes, this works. Thank you so very much for the question. I think, as I've mentioned, we recognize that it's important to have the enabling environment in order to understand blue carbon, to be able to better protect and restore it, but also to engage in initiatives like trading of carbon credits. And so it has been quite a learning curve for us, and I think we're beginning to flatten that learning curve. The legislation, as I mentioned, was introduced in 2023, and we have had stakeholders who have provided their feedback. It still needs some work. There are issues in terms of rights and trading. It proposes to establish a national MRV system, but I think that is critically important, having that strong legal framework. And then, as was mentioned yesterday and earlier today, there is the need to overcome another, I guess, knowledge gap, because there is little expertise available globally in terms of blue carbon and understanding blue carbon, and also translating the very highly technical language to policymakers and practitioners. So there is a need to break down that barrier as well.
Thank you. And then I would like to ask a couple of more questions before we go to the audience. So, Maria Cecilia, how can countries without robust MRV systems start preparing for carbon market access while still ensuring transparency and environmental integrity?
That is a really good question, but I have to say that MRV is one of the aspects, to generate the high integrity blue carbon credits. Definitely it is important. Some countries have started to legislate to require those processes, but it actually starts from the beginning. It actually starts from how the government is involved, providing all the authorizations for projects in the different carbon markets. So countries need to have a little bit of control of, for example, the carbon credits that are going to be generated for Article 6, which is gaining a lot of momentum, but also the credits that are being generated through the voluntary carbon market, and that is through a national carbon registry. So it comes way back from an MRV. MRV is going to be way later in the road, and also the clarity on carbon rights. And that is really key because, for example, when you have communities, you have the government, through different government agencies that manage and own, for example, a mangrove area, who are the owners of that carbon? How can they be transferred? How can they be revoked, for example, if something happens? So having that clarity, for example, on carbon rights is, I think, at the moment is way more important to try to have that clarification, because there are MRB technologies available. The private sector is doing amazing things or NGOs are doing amazing things on providing the technology needed for MRB. But the regulatory aspects that comes from earlier in the process, they are also really important and relevant.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And Chantalle, what advice would you offer to other countries looking to formalize blue carbon governance structures?
Oh, that's a very good one. I know in Belize we are very keen on having the relevant agencies really working together and establishing a very strong and effective coordinating mechanism. So I'm thinking back to, I believe it was 2019, when Belize established a national blue carbon working group. At the time it was informal, and later on it became formalized, but having that group of relevant actors within the same space was critically important to advance our work in this area of blue carbon. Also working through strategic partnerships with those who have more insights into blue carbon. I think I would encourage countries to really rely on that. It's important to have evidence-based policies and also to have those legal frameworks in place.
Thank you. So now the floor is open for the audience. Would anyone like to ask? I think we have, yes.
Thank you both. Wonderful presentations. I really love the dashboard approach. And a question for both of you. So within the carbon market, an important principle is not to damage natural ecosystems purely for the purpose of carbon financing. Within coastal areas, sometimes you find ecosystems which look stressed. You know, the mangroves are not very tall, there may be a lot of ponds, but there's a lot of ecological value there. For Chantalle, a question I would have is, what are the opportunities and challenges of including local knowledge to understand whether the degradation is human-made or whether it's a natural ecosystem that should be protected, even if the mangroves are not very tall? And then for Chechi, what is the potential or not of including such conservation as a metric within your dashboard?
Thank you so very much for your question, and I guess I can go first since I still have the mic. There is, a huge opportunity in terms of including local ecological knowledge, if you will, in terms of assessing the status of our mangrove stands. We have those who interact with the natural environment every day, even more than those who have the regulatory responsibility to be there out on the ground. And so we've had instances where, collaborating with local fishers or tour guides and just thinking to their knowledge over the years in terms of the status of certain mangrove islands and how they have evolved and changed, whether there were introductions of developmental activities or climate-related effects. That has proven to be helpful, and I do believe going forward it will be helpful, especially in decision contexts where resources are very constrained. You have these agencies that have the mandate to be out there and to be monitoring. I think having that partnership with local communities most certainly is and will continue to be fruitful and beneficial.
So our index I explained the three sections or the three categories. In the second one, which is the national government requirements, we have different questions. And two of the questions are related to what you asked. The first one is if the government have specific requirements for benefit sharing mechanism processes, different from the standards. This is just national legislation. That is one aspect. And the other aspect that we evaluate is if the country requires FPIC or other type of participatory processes. And there we have, we're finding different things. There are countries that require FPIC processes, which is different from public hearings, public consultations. For example, in Colombia, you have specific processes when you are working with Afro-Colombian communities or with indigenous communities, but in Brazil, for example, they also have guarantee, like a specific clause that requires benefit sharing distribution with the different type of communities, Quilombos, Afro communities, and indigenous, and all traditional communities. So yes, we do include in our index that question. However, we do not rank if it's required, for example, a public hearing versus an FPIC process, which is really different. But we do identify if they are required in the process.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello. Hola. Bueno, muchas gracias. Primero que
Okay,
todo,
thank you very much, first of all, for the presentations that you gave. It's very interesting in this topic of governance and politics in relation to blue carbon. My question is directed specifically to Chantalle. It is about the coverage of the seagrass meadows. I think that it was really impressive the amount of seagrass that these countries of the islands have, and I think that the coverage is something that is very important in topics of politics and also in governance. When the coverage, you have information to take a lot of decisions, and also the communities have also they see this from a different point of view. So I wanted to ask you specifically in the seagrass meadows, how this process works. How do you define the coverage? Because in mangroves, they use satellite images. I think it's maybe more challenging when you do the seagrass meadows. So I would love to know, how do you guys do that? If you can tell me, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. If I understood correctly, you were inquiring about the methodology to map the seagrass. I honestly do not have the technical response to that in terms of the approach that was used. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I can't respond. Okay.
Thank you. On the right, can we get the microphone? Yes, thank you.
This is a question to Maria Cecilia. You haven't touched, one thing you haven't touched on the presentation is how are you approaching the fact that governments are regulating around the revenue that they want to be shared. And I think that what we see is this is becoming an issue. There is a wide variety in which countries approach this, and this can really impact the enabling conditions in the country. So if you can share some thoughts around it, and what would be your advice or recommendation to policymakers on this?
Yeah, that is a big surprise that we have been encountering in the review process, because we find that some countries just generally say, yes, you need to conduct beneficiary mechanism requirements, and they need to be written in the local language, and so on and so on. But we have other countries, such as Kenya, for example, and they say, okay, for the carbon credit projects that are going to be developed in blue carbon ecosystems, for example, the communities must receive X amount, X% of the revenue. And if it's a different type of carbon credit project, not with blue carbon ecosystem, is a different percentage. And we found, for example, in Tanzania, that the government, which is the owner of the mangrove forest, should receive 61% of the revenue, which is, for a project developer, is like, whoa, that is a lot. So that sends a signal to the market and to the project developers. However, in Tanzania, they also include like a paragraph where they say, okay, if the project is highly, like it has a lot of cost, the cost is high, we can negotiate with the government that percentage or that distribution. But that opens weird conversations, you know, it's not as transparent as it should be. In terms of a recommendation, I don't know what percentage is the correct one, because everything depends on the context. Communities are affected different and use differently each of the coastal ecosystems and the blue carbon ecosystems. We have different stakeholders involved in the government. So in one state could be only one government institution. In other, they have a whole arrangement of institutions, and they have developed all the institutional like capacities for that. So that's going to be different. So I don't have like an answer with a percentage. I definitely do consider that governments must pay attention to the benefit sharing agreement mechanisms. Yes, they do need to be part of it because, for example, they have to process authorization, so there must be some sort of administrative fees. But if you want to open the country for the voluntary carbon market projects, then don't send a signal saying that the government is going to keep a big percentage of the revenues or the profit. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we had an additional question on this side, I believe. No? Okay, I would like to pose just a couple of more questions. Just moving a little bit outside of what we've been discussing throughout these days, my question is related to non-carbon market approaches. So, to both of you, what opportunities do non-carbon market approaches provide in helping Latin American and Caribbean communities to sustainably manage their blue carbon ecosystems? So I can repeat the question again, sorry. What opportunities do non-carbon market approaches provide in helping Latin American and Caribbean communities to sustainably manage their blue carbon ecosystems?
Actually, Rajana just asked me this in the bathroom a few minutes ago. So the answer is kind of fresh. There are some smaller nations that definitely cannot participate in the voluntary carbon market because maybe the ecosystem is not, sequestering and capturing enough CO2. And the costs are going to be way too higher than what they are actually generating. But there are other non-market approaches, and Diana just mentioned the alliance that CEI, RARE, and other organizations are doing, and it's basically understanding, this is like blue economy style. So we need to understand what the coastal ecosystems are offering, what aquaculture opportunities are there, in fisheries improvement. So ecotourism, for example, we visited Mikoko Pamoja, which are generating Kenya, that are generating carbon credits, but they also developed an ecotourism process with the women that are leading this in like in mangrove boardwalk. So they install the whole infrastructure in the mangrove forest, and people can go and visit the project, and they are also generating income through that. So there are different approaches that they can, like communities and countries can also develop. Not everything is about carbon markets because it's not the only revenue source. We have blue bonds that Adrian mentioned, the different options. So yeah, that would be my comment there.
Thank you. Chantalle, would you like to comment on?
Yes, I guess I can just add a bit to what you've mentioned. And in Belize, as I've mentioned earlier, we have a Blue Bond agreement, and that agreement has allowed us to reduce our sovereign debt, but also secure funding to invest in marine conservation activities that includes blue carbon assets, but would also allow us to forge a very strong path forward in terms of blue economy opportunities. So that's one example of a non-carbon market initiative.
Thank you. And just one last question. So how can we ensure that blue carbon policies are also inclusive and benefiting all members of a society or of a community?
I would echo some of what has been mentioned earlier, which we strive to employ in Belize, in that our processes need to be inclusive. They need to be very transparent and participatory. So for us, whether it is marine spatial planning, integrated coastal zone management, or even the delivery of a Blue Bond agreement, looking at blue carbon frameworks, we have established coastal advisory committees, for example, in 9 regions across the country. And whenever there are issues that come up or are not raised directly by the communities, we would engage with these communities on a regular basis. They have assisted us in terms of developing policies, identifying actions, issues, and the appropriate actions to respond. And it's important to have a bottom-up process and engage throughout the process, because while there is consultation fatigue, I think it's even more dangerous to start with engaging key affected persons, but then in the middle of the process or at the end of the process, they are left out in the dark and they don't know where the process is. So it's a very important and powerful tool that can assist in ensuring that policies are up to date, legislations are up to date, and that they are fit for purpose.
Thank you.
And I would just say, to complement, that accountability is needed and transparency is needed. Definitely the bottom-up approaches are needed. But also, for example, countries that have been having the experience of developing nature-based carbon credit projects, not only blue carbon, that haven't developed a regulatory framework, they do have the opportunity to make the process of the new legislation with a participatory approach. So they do have people and communities with the experience, bring them to the conversation, talk to them. For example, Kenya is developing new regulation for Article 6, but that is making that legislation way too complicated, for example, for communities to participate. And yes, we do need all the processes and the standardization and all that, but you need to develop a system that is fair enough and equitable enough for everyone to participate, right? So I would just complement with that.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, we have 5 minutes. Oh, 2, I'm sorry. We have 2 more. So we have time for one last question. If not, yes, there's one.
Hello. 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 I have a small question for Maria Cecilia. Do you know, like, when is the, or how advanced is the Colombian regulatory process of the blue carbon? Like, how has it been? Has it been like participatory, as you mentioned, for Kenya?
So from the moment that we did the country profile for Colombia, we found out about the draft regulation because of news. Okay. I am not sure right now what the status is. I don't want to be irresponsible with the government, so I don't know right now what the status is. But at the moment that we were doing it, it was just a draft that was released in the news, and that's all the information we could have access at the moment. I don't know if they are doing like some sort of consulting or public hearings. They should, if they are not, to try to make it, more participatory, and also to have the perspective of different processes, because developing a project from a blue carbon ecosystem is not the same from a terrestrial forest ecosystem. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to both of our presenters for such enriching discussion. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a nuestras
Okay, and thank you very much to the participants, and we invite you once again for us to take a group picture, so please get back to stage. And to the rest of the participants, we're going to have a coffee break. We only have 10 minutes, so please, you can get out of the room, get to the back part of the lobby, and you can enjoy your coffee, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. We remind you that there is also a place for taking selfies and photos at the lobby. If you want, you can also add us at Blue Carbon MRB, and also use the hashtag IWBC 2025. We'll see you in 10 minutes.